The phone call came from my neighbor, his voice frantic. "Eleanor, you need to get home now. They're bringing in a backhoe." I dropped everything and raced home, my heart hammering against my ribs. The backhoe wasn't for the rose bushes. It was for the old stone foundation in the center of the garden, the only part left of our original cottage, the place where my late husband had buried a time capsule for our family, meant to be opened on our 50th wedding anniversary. My son-in-law, Jason, wasn't just destroying my garden. He was minutes away from obliterating our family's history with a single scoop of steel. He used the HOA to attack my past. Little did he know I was about to use the water rights to completely dry up his future. Jason just crossed his arms, the picture of condescending calm. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, not a hint of remorse in his voice. "Just bringing the property into compliance. You got the notice from the HOA. Your bushes were in violation of the new landscaping aesthetic code." The notice. The crisp envelope I'd found in my mailbox yesterday. The one I'd dismissed as another one of the Homeowners Association's petty power trips. I never dreamed it was a death warrant for my husband's memory. "My husband planted these," I screamed, tears of rage and grief blurring my vision. "They are not bushes. This is my home. And it's part of a community with rules," he retorted, his voice like ice. "I'm on the board now, Eleanor. I'm just doing my job. We're clearing this out to make way for something more low maintenance, less cluttered." I knew exactly what that meant. He wanted to install a synthetic putting green, a monument to his own laziness. He gave a nod to the workmen, and another prized rosebush was ripped from the ground. In that moment, watching him desecrate the last living piece of my husband I had left, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. He thought he had all the power, armed with his little book of rules, but in his haste to destroy my garden, he had forgotten the most fundamental rule of this entire neighborhood. He had forgotten the history of the land he was standing on. He wanted a perfect green lawn for his putting green. He had just forgotten one small detail. I was the one who controlled the water. If you believe a memory is worth fighting for, and that bullies should get what they deserve, then do me a favor. Tell me which city you're from in the comments below, subscribe to the channel, and let's see this story of justice through to the end. Our property was the original homestead in this valley. Arthur and I bought the 10-acre plot 30 years ago, long before the rolling hills were carved up into the quarter-acre lots of the Willow Creek Estates. Our house was the first, and our well, a deep, reliable artesian well, was the only source of fresh water for miles. When the developers came, they made a deal with Arthur. They bought 8 of our 10 acres to build their subdivision, but as part of the sale, they needed access to our water. They built the entire irrigation infrastructure, the pipes that fed every sprinkler system, filled every swimming pool, and watered every perfect manicured lawn, and connected it all to a single main pump house located on our remaining 2 acres. The contract was ironclad. In exchange for providing the water, we paid no HOA dues, and we retained sole, exclusive control over the pump house. We had a master valve, a single, heavy, iron wheel that could, with a turn, shut off the flow of water to the entire community. For 20 years, it was a partnership. We were good neighbors. We provided the water, and the community flourished. When Arthur passed away, the deed and the water rights transferred solely to me. Jason, my daughter Chloe's husband, never bothered to understand any of this. He was a man who only saw the surface of things. He saw my sprawling garden not as a testament to a lifetime of love, but as a chore. He saw me not as the matriarch of the family, but as an old woman standing in the way of the modern lifestyle he wanted. He had married my daughter, moved into a house just down the street, and immediately set his sights on climbing the HOA ladder. For a man with no discernible skills or ambition in his professional life, the petty power of the HOA was intoxicating. He got himself elected to the board and quickly allied with the most draconian members, pushing for stricter, more invasive rules. His pet project was the Aesthetic Uniformity Initiative, a set of rules so restrictive it dictated the exact shade of beige your house could be painted and the maximum allowable height of a garden gnome. My rose garden, with its wild, romantic beauty, was an affront to his sterile vision. It was old-fashioned. It was, in his words, a lot of work. He saw it as a symbol of the past he wanted to erase. He convinced the board that my heirloom roses were non-compliant flora and that their thorns posed a safety hazard. It was all nonsense, a transparent power play. But he had the votes. I stood there, paralyzed, as the last rosebush was thrown onto a pile of dirt. The garden was a wound of raw earth. Jason gave a final, satisfied nod and walked away, leaving me amidst the carnage. The smell of upturned soil and crushed petals filled the air. The grief was so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. But beneath the grief, a different feeling was taking root. A cold, quiet rage. He had used a committee to tear up my life. He had used a rule book to break my heart. He had forgotten that all the rules in the world don't matter if you don't have water. That evening, I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I sat in my quiet house and planned. I reread the old water contract Arthur had signed. The language was clear. I was obligated to provide water, barring any breach of covenant or act of bad faith from the HOA. Destroying a widow's memorial garden seemed like a fairly significant act of bad faith. At dawn, I walked out to the old brick pump house at the edge of my property. The air was cool and still. Inside, the pump hummed along, its steady rhythm a heartbeat for the entire neighborhood. In the center of the room, coming up from the concrete floor, was the main valve. It was large and red, its iron surface cool to the touch. It hadn't been turned in over 2 decades. I put my hands on the wheel. It was stiff. I took a deep breath, pictured Jason's smug face, and pulled. With a deep, groaning sound of metal on metal, the wheel began to turn. I turned it again, and again, until it would turn no more. The steady hum of the pump faltered, and then a beautiful, profound silence filled the small brick building. Jason wanted to live in a world of rules and consequences. He was about to get his wish. The silence from the pump house was the first shot in a war Jason didn't even know he was fighting. The effects were not immediate, but like a slow-acting poison, they began to work their way through the veins of the community. The first sign of trouble came around 7 a.m., the time when the automated sprinkler systems of Willow Creek usually hissed to life, blanketing the perfect lawns in a fine mist. That morning, there was only an eerie, unnatural quiet. I sat on my back porch, a cup of hot coffee warming my hands, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful, serene morning, the kind Arthur and I had cherished. Across the street, I saw my neighbor, Mr. Gable, a retired Marine who treated his lawn with military precision, come out in his bathrobe. He stared at his dry driveway, then walked over to inspect a sprinkler head that had failed to pop up. He tapped it with his foot, a confused look on his face. A few houses down, another neighbor was doing the same. A quiet, collective bewilderment was spreading through the subdivision as the sun climbed higher, bringing with it the promise of a hot, unforgiving day. By mid-morning, the confusion had curdled into concern. The neighborhood's private online forum, usually a sleepy place for lost pet announcements and recommendations for plumbers, was buzzing with activity. "Is anyone else's sprinkler system not working?" the first post read. It was followed by dozens of replies. "Mine is out too. I tried running it manually. Nothing. I called the water company, and they said the city line is fine." The digital finger-pointing had begun, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it found its way to the HOA board. I could see Jason's house from my kitchen window. He was pacing on his front lawn, phone pressed to his ear, his posture growing more rigid with every call. He was a man who craved control, who had built his little empire on the enforcement of order. And now he had lost control of the most fundamental resource in his entire kingdom. My daughter, Chloe, called me around noon. Her voice was laced with the stress she was no doubt absorbing from her husband. "Mom, have you heard? The water is out for the whole neighborhood's irrigation system. It's a total disaster. Jason is going crazy. He's been on the phone with the management company all morning. He thinks the main pump must have failed." "Oh dear," I said, my voice a perfect symphony of surprise and motherly concern. "That sounds like a terrible problem. He must be under a lot of pressure. I do hope he can figure it out." I took a quiet sip of my iced tea. "He's calling in an emergency plumbing company," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's telling everyone he's got it under control, but honestly, Mom, he has no idea what he's doing. I knew the plumber would be a complete and total waste of time, and more importantly, a waste of the HOA's money. The pump wasn't broken. It was resting. And the cost of that emergency weekend call-out would be the first of many bills that would start to pile up on Jason's desk. Around 3 p.m., a large, brightly colored van from Aquaflow Emergency Plumbing pulled up to the main gate of my property, the one that led to the pump house. Jason was with them, looking stressed but trying to project an air of authority. I walked down my long driveway to meet them. "Eleanor," Jason said, his tone clipped and impatient, foregoing any pleasantries. "We need to get into the pump house. The main pump is down. The whole neighborhood is waiting." "Is it?" I asked, widening my eyes in feigned surprise. "That's so odd. It was humming along just fine yesterday." I fumbled with the old brass key, taking my time before finally unlocking the heavy gate and letting them pass. The plumber, a young man with a confident swagger and a hefty toolkit, walked into the brick building, took one look at the array of pipes and gauges, and then focused on the massive red wheel at the center of the room. He turned to Jason. "Well, there's your problem," he said, pointing a thick finger at the valve. "The main valve is shut off, completely." Jason stared at the red wheel, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. "Shut off? How could that happen?" He shot a look at me, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, which was quickly replaced by a dawning horror. "That is strange," I said, looking directly back at him, my expression a carefully crafted mask of innocence. "The water contract is very clear. This valve is only to be operated by the property owner in case of a major emergency. That's me. And I certainly haven't touched it." I was lying, of course, a lie as smooth and cool as the concrete floor beneath us. Maybe it was an act of vandalism, someone trying to cause trouble. Or maybe, I added, letting the words hang in the air with just the right amount of gravity, it's a sign of a mechanical failure due to age. This is old equipment, after all. The plumber walked over and put his hands on the wheel, giving it a tug. "It's not a failure. This was turned off by hand. And it's on there good and tight." Jason's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He was furious, but he couldn't accuse me. He had no proof, and to throw around such a wild accusation at a grieving widow would make him look unhinged. "Well, for God's sake, just turn it back on," he demanded, his voice echoing in the small building. I held up a hand, a gesture of calm authority. "I'm not so sure that's a good idea, Jason," I said, my voice suddenly firm and serious. "If this equipment is, as you say, potentially failing, turning it back on without a proper inspection could be a catastrophic liability. What if a main pipe bursts under pressure? What if the pump seizes and causes an electrical fire? The contract clearly states that the Homeowners Association is responsible for all maintenance, repairs, and safety of the system." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm saying," I declared, "that before this valve is touched, I require a full, top-to-bottom diagnostic and safety inspection of the entire water distribution system. I want that inspection performed by a licensed and bonded water infrastructure engineer, not just a plumber. I want a written, certified report guaranteeing that the system is safe to operate. I am not going to be held liable for any damages caused by turning on what could be faulty equipment. It's a matter of protecting my property and, frankly, the entire community. I'm sure a man who values rules, procedures, and safety as much as you do can understand that." I had him. I had wrapped him in the very bureaucratic red tape that he loved to use on others. The plumber, sensing a much larger and more expensive job on the horizon, immediately took my side. "She's got a point, boss. You turn this on, and a main pipe bursts under someone's foundation. The HOA is looking at hundreds of thousands in damages. You need a specialist for this." Jason was trapped. He couldn't turn the water on without my permission. And I wasn't giving my permission without a very expensive, very time-consuming, and very difficult-to-find specialist's report. Every day that passed, the perfect green lawns of Willow Creek would get a little bit browner. The pristine azure pools would get a little bit cloudier, and the anger of the residents would be directed squarely at the man on the HOA board who had promised them order and was now delivering only dust. He stormed off, shouting into his phone about finding an engineer. I locked the gate to the pump house behind him. a small, satisfied smile on my face. The lawns were dying, and my revenge was just beginning to bloom. The weekend passed in a haze of mounting frustration for the residents of Willow Creek. The relentless sun beat down, turning the once lush green carpets of lawn into a crispy, yellowing patchwork. The social media forum, which had started with confused questions, had now evolved into a platform for open rage. Photos of wilting flower beds and thirsty-looking shrubs were posted with angry captions. "This is what our HOA dues are paying for," one resident wrote. "I pay $200 a month for a brown lawn," another commented. The digital mob was getting restless, and they needed a target. Jason, with his self-appointed position of authority, had painted a giant bullseye on his own back. On Monday morning, my lawyer, Samuel, called me. "Eleanor, I've reviewed the water contract again. It's a thing of beauty. Arthur really knew what he was doing," he said with a chuckle. "The bad faith clause is your golden ticket. The destruction of your memorial garden is a flagrant and demonstrable act of bad faith by a sitting board member. You are well within your rights to suspend services pending a resolution." "And what does a resolution look like, Samuel?" I asked. "It looks like whatever we want it to look like," he replied. "We're holding all the cards. We draft a formal letter. We demand a public apology. We demand full financial restitution for the destruction of your garden, including the cost of sourcing and replanting mature, equivalent rose bushes. And we demand the immediate resignation of one Mr. Jason from the HOA board. Until those conditions are met, the water stays off." It was a perfect, multi-pronged attack. It addressed the emotional wound, the financial damage, and the root of the problem: Jason's abuse of power. Samuel drafted the letter, a masterpiece of cold, legal precision, and we sent it via registered mail to the HOA's main office, with copies sent to every board member's personal address. While we waited for the letter to land, Jason was on a desperate hunt for a water infrastructure engineer. As I suspected, they were not easy to come by. It was a highly specialized field, and the few firms in the state were booked weeks, if not months, in advance. He finally found a company 3 hours away that was willing to send someone for an emergency consultation at a price that I was sure made the HOA's treasurer break out in a cold sweat. The engineer, a serious-looking woman in her 50s, arrived 2 days later. Jason, looking haggard and sleep-deprived, met her at the pump house gate. I was there, of course, a concerned property owner, ready to observe. I listened as Jason explained the situation, carefully omitting the part about my demolished garden and my formal legal dispute. He was trying to frame it as a simple, inexplicable mechanical issue. The engineer was thorough. She spent hours inspecting the pump, the electrical systems, and the pressure gauges. She took notes, she made calculations, she hummed thoughtfully to herself. Finally, she delivered her verdict. "The system is old, no doubt," she said, "but it's a solid, well-built piece of machinery. The pump is sound. The pipes show no signs of immediate stress. I see no reason why this valve can't be reopened. However," she added, turning to me, "as the property owner, you are correct to be cautious. To give you a full, legally binding guarantee of safety, my firm would need to conduct a comprehensive pressure test of the entire subterranean pipe network. It's an invasive process. We'd have to dig access pits on several properties. The whole thing would take a few weeks and cost, well, it would be substantial." Jason's face fell. He had spent thousands on this consultation, only to be told that the real solution would cost tens of thousands more and take weeks he didn't have. He was sinking in quicksand, and every move he made just pulled him deeper. It was the next day that our letter arrived, landing on the desk of the HOA president and in the mailboxes of the board members. The effect was instantaneous. My phone started ringing. It was Chloe, my daughter, and she was sobbing. "Mom, what have you done?" she cried. "Jason just called me. He said you're suing the HOA. You're trying to get him kicked off the board. You're the one keeping the water off. How could you be so selfish?" "Selfish?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Was your husband being selfish when he tore up your father's roses? Was he being selfish when he laughed about it? This isn't a game, Chloe. This is about respect, something your husband has clearly forgotten." The board called an emergency closed-door meeting that night. From what I heard later from Mr. Gable, who had a friend on the board, it was a bloodbath. Jason was savaged. The other board members, now facing a costly lawsuit and the wrath of hundreds of angry, lawn-proud residents, turned on him completely. His petty crusade against me had now become a full-blown financial and legal crisis for the entire community. They gave him an ultimatum: fix the mess he had created, or they would vote to have him removed. He was stripped of all his allies. He was isolated, cornered, and facing a mutiny from the very people he had tried to rule. The pressure was mounting. The brown lawns were a constant, visible reminder of his failure, and he knew with dawning terror that the only person who could save him was the one person he had tried so hard to break. The ball was now in his court. He could choose pride and ruin, or he could choose humility and survival. I waited by the phone, knowing that his surrender was no longer a matter of if, but when. The call came 2 days after the emergency board meeting. It wasn't from Jason, of course. His pride would never allow him to make that call himself. It was my daughter, Chloe, her voice strained and stripped of its usual cheerful confidence. "Mom," she began, the words sounding heavy and tired. "Jason wants to talk. We want to come over and talk." "Does he?" I replied, my voice cool and neutral. "Is he prepared to discuss the terms outlined in my lawyer's letter?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her muffled voice speaking to him in the background. She came back on the line. "Yes," she said, her voice small. "He is." "Then I will be available at 4 o'clock this afternoon," I said, and hung up. I was not going to make this easy for them. I was not the supplicant. I was the one with the power, and they would come to me on my terms at my convenience. I spent the next few hours preparing, not by baking cookies or making tea, but by setting a stage. I called my lawyer, Samuel, and asked him to be present. His presence would transform this from a tearful family chat into a formal negotiation. I placed a single, beautiful white rose, salvaged from the wreckage of my garden, in a crystal vase on the living room table. It was a silent, elegant reminder of the cost of their actions. At precisely 4 o'clock, they arrived. Jason looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. His shoulders were slumped, his face was pale, and the arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful scowl. Chloe's eyes were red and puffy. She looked lost, a woman caught between the husband she had enabled and the mother he had wronged. I led them to the living room, where Samuel was waiting, a folder of documents resting on his lap. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Jason, prodded by a look from Chloe, cleared his throat and began to speak. He mumbled a pathetic, half-hearted apology, a string of words about getting carried away and not realizing how much the roses meant. It was a coward's apology, devoid of any real remorse. I let him finish, the silence hanging heavy in the air. Then I looked at him, my gaze as hard and unyielding as granite. "That's not good enough, Jason," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You didn't get carried away. You acted with deliberate cruelty. You enjoyed it. I don't want a pathetic excuse. I want accountability." Samuel then took over, his voice calm and authoritative. He laid out our terms again, one by one, like a death sentence. "First," he began, "the matter of the public apology. A written apology, acknowledging your malicious intent, will be read by you, Mr. Sterling, at the next general HOA meeting. That letter will also be posted on the community website for a period of no less than 6 months." Jason flinched as if he'd been struck. Public humiliation was a fate worse than death for a man like him. "Second," Samuel continued, "the matter of restitution. You will personally pay for the complete restoration of Mrs. Vance's garden. We have a quote from the most respected landscape architect in the state. The cost to source and replant mature heirloom-grade roses and repair the damage to the soil will be $42,000. Chloe let out a small gasp. I saw Jason's face drain of all color. It was a staggering sum, an amount that I knew would cripple them financially. "And third," Samuel concluded, "your immediate and permanent resignation from the Willow Creek HOA board. You will sign a document legally barring you from ever seeking a position on this or any other HOA board in this county." Jason looked like he was going to be sick. He had tried to build a small kingdom, and now he was being exiled from it forever. He looked at me, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He was searching for a hint of softness, a sign of the forgiving mother-in-law he had taken for granted. He found none. "This is insane," he stammered. "We can't afford that. It's extortion." "No," I said, speaking for the first time since my initial rejection of his apology. "It's a consequence. It's the price of what you did. You used the HOA's money to hire a crew to destroy my garden in a single afternoon. Now, you will use your own money to spend months, perhaps years, rebuilding it. You wanted to live in a world of rules and consequences, Jason. Welcome to it." Chloe was openly crying now. "Mom, please," she begged. "Don't do this to us." "This is not a negotiation, Chloe," I said, my voice firm. "These are the terms of surrender. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement. If you do not, Samuel is instructed to file the lawsuit first thing Wednesday morning, and the water will remain off indefinitely. The choice is yours." I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. They were left there, sitting on my sofa, staring at the legally binding document that represented the complete and total demolition of their finances and social standing. As they walked out of my house, the setting sun cast a long shadow behind them. Jason's shadow looked small and weak, the shadow of a man who had picked a fight with a force of nature he never understood, and had been utterly and completely broken by it. The first phase of my revenge was complete. The next phase, the rebuilding of my garden on his dime, was about to begin, and I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. The signing of the agreement was a quiet, joyless affair held in Samuel's office. Jason looked like a ghost, his signature a shaky scrawl on the page that sealed his fate. The $42,000 check he wrote, post-dated for when the bank loan he was forced to take out would clear, felt like a lead weight in my hand. It was not a payment. It was a tribute, an offering made to the woman he had so grievously underestimated. The first consequence of his surrender was the immediate restoration of water to Willow Creek. That afternoon, I walked down to the pump house, the signed agreement in my briefcase. I put my hands on the large red wheel and, with a satisfying groan of metal, turned it counterclockwise. A deep, powerful hum filled the small building as the pump roared back to life. Across the neighborhood, I could almost hear a collective sigh of relief as sprinkler heads popped up and began their life-giving dance. I had become the savior of the very community from which Jason had tried to ostracize me. The next HOA meeting was a spectacle of exquisite humiliation. The room was packed, a standing-room-only crowd of residents eager to witness the final public downfall of their former tormentor. Jason stood at the podium, his hands trembling, and read the apology letter I had personally drafted for him. He read of his malicious and targeted harassment, his abuse of power, and his profound disrespect for a founding member of our community. He didn't look up once. When he finished, he mumbled his resignation, and a wave of polite but distinctly unenthusiastic applause filled the room. His reign was over. Now, the true artistry of my revenge began. I didn't just cash his check. I used it to orchestrate a restoration so grand, so meticulously perfect, that it would serve as a permanent, living monument to his defeat. I hired the landscape architect, a renowned artist named Isabel, and gave her a simple instruction. Spare no expense. I want you to create the most beautiful rose garden in the entire state, right here in this yard. The work began a week later. It was not a quiet affair. Large trucks rumbled through the neighborhood, delivering tons of enriched organic soil. A team of master gardeners, the best in the region, descended upon my property. They didn't just replant, they resculpted the entire landscape. They built elegant, terraced stone walls to create different levels. They installed a discreet, state-of-the-art irrigation and lighting system. And then came the roses. Isabel had sourced them from all over the world. There were fragrant David Austins from England, vibrant hybrid teas from France, and hardy, ancient varieties I had only ever read about in books. Each one was a mature, specimen-grade plant, costing a small fortune. They arrived in refrigerated trucks, their root balls carefully wrapped in burlap. Every day, Jason and Chloe had to drive past my house and witness this grand resurrection. They had to see the barren, wounded earth they had created being transformed into a a paradise they were paying for. They had to watch as their crippling bank loan was converted into a breathtaking display of beauty that brought joy to everyone but them. Every petal that unfurled was a testament to his folly. Every compliment I received from a neighbor was a twist of the knife. The project took 2 months. When it was finished, it was more than a garden. It was a masterpiece. It was a symphony of color and fragrance, a living work of art that was the envy of the entire county. The local newspaper even did a feature on it in their Sunday lifestyle section, complete with stunning photographs. The article called it the Willow Creek Wonder and praised the anonymous benefactor who had funded such a remarkable community asset. I, of course, remained silent about the source of the funding. I didn't have to say a word. Jason knew. And he knew that everyone else in the neighborhood knew. My victory was absolute, but there was one final, loose thread. My daughter. Chloe was caught in the fallout, devastated by their financial ruin and humiliated by her husband's public disgrace. Our relationship was strained to the breaking point. She would call, her conversations a mixture of tearful apologies and bitter accusations. I listened, but I offered no comfort. She had made her choice when she stood by and watched him destroy her father's memory. This was a lesson she needed to learn on her own. The lesson came to a head one crisp autumn evening. I was hosting a small garden party for some friends. The roses were in their final, glorious bloom of the season. As I was walking through the garden, I saw Chloe standing at the edge of my property, just watching. She looked hesitant, broken. I excused myself from my guests and walked over to her. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, it is," I replied. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears finally streaming down her face. "I was weak. I let him convince me that you were the problem. I should have stood up for you, for Dad." I looked at my daughter, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the girl I had raised, not the woman her husband had twisted her into. I knew this was the moment, the final piece of my plan. "There is a way you can make it right," I said quietly. She looked up, her eyes full of a desperate hope. "Anything," she said. "The check Jason wrote," I began. "The $42,000. I have not spent it. I paid for this garden with my own money. I am going to give that check back to you, and only to you. It is enough to pay off the loan he took out, but it comes with a condition. The money is yours, to free yourself. What you do with that freedom is up to you." I was offering her more than just money. I was offering her a choice to stay with the man who had led her down a path of cruelty and ruin, or a choice to leave, to start over, free and clear. I had broken him financially, and now I was giving my daughter the key to unlock her own cage. The final act of revenge wasn't just about restoring my garden. It was about reclaiming my daughter from the man who had tried to take everything from me. Chloe stared at me, the magnitude of my offer slowly dawning on her. It was a move she could never have anticipated. She expected punishment, lectures, perhaps a lifetime of strained silence. She never expected an act of calculated grace. The $42,000 wasn't a gift. It was a test. It was a tool. It was a question posed in the form of a check. Was her future worth more than her loyalty to a broken man? "Mom, I don't know what to say," she stammered, wiping tears from her face. "You don't have to say anything right now, Chloe," I said, my voice softening for the first time. "I am your mother, and I will always love you, but I will not stand by and watch you be dragged down by a man who is cruel and weak. Your father built a legacy of strength and integrity. Jason tried to tear that down. The money is your chance to decide which legacy you want to be a part of." I didn't press her. I let her walk away that evening with the weight of that choice on her shoulders. For the next 2 weeks, an agonizing silence hung between us. I saw the lights on late at their house. I saw their cars coming and going. I knew a battle was being waged within those walls, a final desperate struggle for the soul of their marriage. Then, one Saturday morning, a moving van pulled up to their house. It wasn't a large truck, just a small one, the kind you rent for a one-person move. I watched from my window as Chloe, with the help of a few of her old college friends, began to load boxes into the back. Jason was nowhere in sight. She was leaving him. Later that afternoon, she came to my house. She looked different. The weight of the past few months seemed to have lifted from her. Her eyes were clear, and though she looked sad, she also looked free. "I deposited the check," she said quietly. "I paid off the loan in full, and I left him. I'm moving into a small apartment downtown to figure things out." I didn't say, "I told you so." I just opened my arms, and she fell into them, sobbing. It was the first time we had hugged in almost a year. We stood there, mother and daughter, surrounded by the fragrant blooms of her father's restored legacy, and began the slow, painful process of healing. The fallout in the neighborhood was swift. Jason, now alone and financially crippled, became a pariah. His public disgrace, followed by his wife leaving him, was too much for his fragile ego. Within a month, a for sale sign was on his lawn. He sold the house at a loss and moved out of Willow Creek, disappearing from our lives as quietly as a shadow at dusk. The putting green he had dreamed of was never built. With Jason gone and Mr. Henderson at the helm of a reformed HOA, a new era of peace and common sense dawned in the community. My garden became a local treasure. People would stop by on their evening walks just to admire the roses. I hosted charity events and garden tours, using the beauty that had been born from such ugliness to bring joy to others. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and turned it into the most beautiful part of my home. My relationship with Chloe slowly rebuilt itself, brick by painful brick. It wasn't easy. There was therapy, there were difficult conversations, and there were tears, but she was committed. She got a job, she found her independence, and she rediscovered the strong, kind woman she was meant to be before Jason's influence had poisoned her. One day, about a year after she had left him, she came over with a small potted rose bush. It was a variety I didn't have. "I saw this at the nursery," she said, her voice full of a quiet, new confidence. I thought it would look nice next to the white ones Dad loved so much." We went out into the garden together. We dug a hole in the rich, dark earth, mother and daughter, side by side. We planted the new rose bush, a small, hopeful addition to the sprawling legacy around us. As we patted the soil down around its base, I looked at the vibrant, living testament to the battles we had fought. My revenge against Jason had been absolute. I had taken his power, his money, and his wife, but my victory wasn't in his destruction. My true victory was right here, in this moment. It was in the restoration of my husband's memory. It was in the liberation of my community. And most importantly, it was in the reclaiming of my daughter. I had turned the water off to save my garden, but in the end, I had managed to save so much more. And so, my garden bloomed again, stronger and more beautiful than before. It became a testament not to what I had lost, but to what can be rebuilt when you refuse to let cruelty win. The fight wasn't just about roses. It was about reclaiming my peace, my home, and my daughter from a man who understood the rules, but not their purpose. I'm genuinely curious, and I really want to know what you think. If you were in my shoes, faced with that level of betrayal, what would you have done? Would you have fought back the same way, or chosen a different path? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth fighting for, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. And while you're here, I've left 2 of our community's favorite revenge stories on the screen for you now. I guarantee the endings will leave you speechless. Click on one of them, and I'll see you in the next story.